Welcome back to Tutorial Tidbits and welcome to my channel. I'm Elizabeth St. Hilaire, and this week I have something exciting to share with you. It's something new that I tried and it came out fabulous, and so I'm super excited. It is Sgraffito on the gel plate, which I've done before, but this time I'm adding Posca paint pens to it, and I am using my Matisse stencil cutouts from joggles to leave big empty areas that gave me an opportunity to add the Posca pens and to doodle in some empty open spaces. So if you've got a few minutes, I think you're going to love this. Let's go check it out. All right, so this is the second time that I'm experimenting with Sgraffito scratching through the paint on the gel plate. So this time I want to incorporate some of my Matisse tab cut stencil and masks from joggles into the layout, along with some Posca paint pens. So these are called tab cut because when you get them, they come in a sheet like this and you have to cut the tiny tabs to take them out. And the reason why they do that is because they will become loose pieces once you cut them out. But you'll also be left with a sheet of Mylar with the openings that these pop out of. So you'll have the pieces and you'll have basically a stencil with these shapes left behind. So in case you've ever ordered these and you don't really know how to take them apart, because I had a student recently that bought them but didn't know how to cut them, you're just going to look for the little tabs in here and you're going to snip the tab with small scissors. And there's typically only 1 or 2 or 3 tabs basically that are holding it in. But you don't want to try and tear it because you can't tear this plastic. So you've got to get some small scissors and just get in there and cut. So this is 3 tabs on this one. So I got 3 tabs, cut, and it's out. So that's all. And then I've got a second layer of shape in this. So I've actually got 2 shapes in this. Plus now what's left behind is leaving the silhouette shape of the bird. So this is a really neat way to get the stencil designs, because you really get multiple pieces for the price of one. So, and once I get these all cut out, I just put them in a baggie, like a freezer bag, all together, so that I have all the pieces in one place. And then I just organize the leftover sheet with the rest of my stencils in my stencil hanging system. Okay, so I've cut the tabs now here, and I've got these 2 pieces. So that's how you do the tab cuts. I'm going to, off camera, cut out a few more pieces that I want to use for this project, and I'll be right back. Okay, so now I have all the pieces that I want to use cut out, and I'm going for the chunkier, thicker lined pieces rather than the thinner things like this. So I went for the solid pieces and the wiggly lines. And the circles also have, well, the circles, I use that term loosely. These chunky shapes also have an outline element to them as well. But I'm going for the heavy, chunky shapes. So basically I'm going to arrange these on my gel plate. And they are going to, I'm then going to brayer paint over the top of them and then remove them. So these shapes are going to leave me the open spaces to add some Posca paint pen and to give me some restful area from the Sgraffito patterns that I end up scratching in. So I want some of this to go off the edges so it doesn't all seem like it's right in the middle. And I want some of it not to go off the edges, and I want to get an interesting composition and leave myself some room for adding pattern
in the spaces around these pieces because that's where my solid color of paint will be. So you want to think about it in terms of this space in here on the gel plate. That's where the Sgraffito scratching is going to go. These are where the open areas of paint will be for adding Posca pen or just leaving restful space for the background color that we pull the print with to show through. So it's a lot of thinking at once, and it's probably going to take some practice for you to get the hang of it and to have success. So don't fret if the first time it doesn't completely work out. So what I want to scratch through is a dark color. And since I typically don't use black, my options are this dioxazine purple, or the other darkest color in my stash is Van Dyke brown. But I'm going to go with the dioxazine purple. And again, I'm going to brayer that out over the top of these pieces. So I find that it's best to get the paint on the brayer off to the side and then with a brayer loaded with paint to go over. If you squeeze the paint over the top of these, sometimes it smudges under the edges and it doesn't get spread out evenly. So I'm going to grab a second gel plate so that I can use it as a palette for my brayer. Okay, so just off to the side here, I have an 8x10 gel plate, but I would say my favorite is to use a 5x7, just in case you don't have tons of real estate on your tabletop. And I do have a 5x7, but it's out in the garage studio, and I don't feel like trying to find it. So you don't need a large gel plate off to the side, is what I'm saying. You can use a small one as long as it covers the brayer. And I'm going to be using my 6-inch Speedball Deluxe sprayer. I love the Deluxe sprayer because it is an actual rubber roller. And because of that, you can peel the paint right off of it, which I did this morning. It's so satisfying. Ultimately, when you get a good paint buildup, you can peel it all off because it doesn't adhere to the rubber permanently. And so that's why the Deluxe rubber brayer is great, because now I'm right back to brand spanking new with my brayer, at least for the next 30 seconds. So I'm going to put a decent amount of that dioxazine purple on the plate off to the side, and I'm going to get my brayer all covered with paint in that pile, that puddle, and then I take the brayer with the paint on it and roll it onto the plate. This way it's not likely to squish underneath the shapes, and it's not likely to puddle in the middle of them. Okay, so we're just getting a nice even coat. I keep loading paint on it on the gel plate and transferring it to the big plate. And while it's out there, I can certainly use the excess paint to create a stencil print onto another piece of paper, and it'll give me a good base coat and I won't be wasting any paint. Okay, so I've got that all on there now, and I want to make sure I have good coverage. This is the layer that I'm going to be scratching through, so I want to make sure I get it right out to the edges and a decent even thickness across the whole plate. I've got some divots and folds and dents in my plate from not storing it properly, but I'm going to embrace that today. Okay, so now I'm going to use a palette knife to help me lift these pieces off the plate and reveal my nice big negative spaces. And the great thing about the individual pieces is that I can arrange them in any way that I want, and every time I arrange them I could get a different combination of shapes. And so I could create a series of these prints where each one is slightly different, but they're in the theme of having the same shapes. So I designed these free form or loose cut stencils for joggles with the hopes that people could use them to create kind of endless combinations rather than being locked into one composition designed by me. So now you get to play a part in the composition of your gel print. All right, so I'm just sticking the palette knife right up under the edge so I don't put fingerprints in my pattern. Now I'm going to let that dry completely and get my Posca pens and pull a print from my palette gel plate. Okay, so it's very important that your base layer is completely dry. And I have some silver flakes on my gel plate, it seems, from a previous video. I'm not going to worry about that. I've taken out my stylus tools that I use for the Sgraffito scratching. They have a blunt tip. All of them do. And they have different size tips on different ends, which is kind of cool. So here's like the largest one, and you can see that it is a blunt. It's not going to harm the gel plate. They're rounded at the bottom. So this is kind of be my heavier line. You can also do this with the end of a paintbrush, a drinking straw. You can experiment with tools to scrape into the plate with. Just use blunt objects. They are going to work the best. But before we get into scraping, I'm going to be adding color and pattern with my Posca paint markers. Now, one thing you need to know about the Posca paint markers is that they're going to stain the plate. Sometimes I get nasty emails with people that will try the Posca on the plate, and they will say that I didn't tell them that they're going to stain the plate. They will, when I say they'll stain the plate, is when you pull the print, there will be residual that will be in the plate for several further prints, but then it kind of lingers and hangs about. So if that really bothers you, the way to clean it is that you want to use baby oil, because this is a mineral oil and that is what is in the plate. So for any stains that are left behind, stains specifically from Posca pens or alcohol inks, not so much paint, but stains that are not pulling off, you just get a little bit of baby oil and a makeup pad or a soft cloth, and you massage and wipe and blend, and it will all come off. So if the Posca paint residual bothers you, this is your ticket. Okay, so what I want to do then is add pattern into some of my open spaces, because adding pattern on top of this purple is not going to show up, because what you need to remember about gel printing is that this layer on the bottom, when you put the paper on it and pull it, when you pull the paper, the bottom layer will be on top on the paper. So if I draw with my Posca pen on top of this paint, you're not going to see it, because when I press my paper and pull it, what is on the surface is all the purple. So the only place the Posca pen marks are going to show up is when you do them in the openings, in the negative spaces. And that's why I used the Matisse cutouts to create those spaces for myself. So it's kind of just like doodling with the pen and with the Sgraffito, with the scratching. So in this instance, I'm adding lines, and when I get to the scratching, I'm going to be removing lines. And I can remove them not only from the purple paint, but also through the Posca pen. So I try to pick colors that will contrast and complement the purple. The color palette will depend on the Poscas that you have available and the color that you choose as your base. A lot of times people will use black as the base because it is pretty neutral. For me, I don't ever use black paint in my work, so I don't have any black paint. But if you wanted to use black, of course, any color combination of Poscas are going to be complementary to the black. So here I've made myself a double ring, and I've got a lot of different nibs, tips of the Posca pens, but this one is a PC7M, and it's great for dots. And you know that for the Posca, you have to prime it by depressing the tip onto a piece of paper, and that gets the paint to flow down into the tip. And I don't think my yellow is dry yet, so I'm going to wait because my pink is sort of bleeding into my yellow there. So let's switch gears on that. I'm going to come out here and do some small line work. I think the key too is to leave open space and not fill in completely with your Posca either. And then ultimately we will pull this print with a color that is kind of neutral. We'll have to think about what color we're going to pull it with, because we'll have so many different Posca paint colors. I have found in the past that when the paint that you use to pull it, you should go with something that kind of is just neutral and light so it doesn't absorb the paint markers. Okay, so now I have some really great fun doodly patterns, and I need to wait for that to dry. But in the meantime, I can start to scrape through the dried dioxazine purple paint. So I'm going to grab a wet wipe because when the paint scruffs off, it's a little bit messy. So I'll get a wet wipe that I can gather that up with, and we'll get started. Okay, so the pattern gets removed with the stylus, and so I'm scratching through, and then I can just wipe off and making a negative pattern. So unlike the Posca pens where I'm adding pattern, when I use the stylus, I am removing. And it's really a lot like doodling, so it should be relaxing, and you shouldn't worry about what it's going to look like, because I believe that the joy of this is more in the process than the end product. So it's fun to have a beautiful print, but it's also fun to just sit and enjoy the process of doodling. So you can move the plate around. You can look at it from underneath to see how your pattern is looking. You can hold it up to the light to see how your pattern is looking, and get a little bit of a perspective of how the scraping is going. It's not too much of a slow going process, but it is a bit. But again, I'm not in a rush, and I'm really enjoying the process of this. And that's really the idea, is to just have fun and be in the moment. So this effect is going to look a little bit like block printing because of the way that the pattern is scratched out and the edges are going to be a little rough. And so it's going to give you a unique look and an indirect printing method, because I'm creating the pattern on the gel plate, and then I'm going to transfer that pattern from drawing on the gel plate onto a paper. So we're going to get an indirect printing method, and we're going to get a look that resembles more of drawing or wood carving with a little bit more natural edge than if this were a big stencil created out of plastic with all perfectly smooth curves and edges. So don't worry if your lines are rough and are not perfect, because that's the idea. If we wanted a perfectly smooth pattern, we would go with a stencil. So this is supposed to look hand-drawn, irregular, and rough. And remember, I'm wiping off the tip of my stylus with my wet wipe to keep it clean and to keep the paint chips from going all over the place. This is fluid acrylic though, remember, so it's thin. So it scratches through relatively easily, and it's not producing giant crumbs like a heavy body paint would. This is just producing a small amount of scratched off paint. Now, another way that you can make the paint dissolve a little bit and it's going to give you a smooth edge is if you dip your tool in a little bit of baby oil. It allows the tool to slide a little bit more, and it will give you a smoother edge on some of your shapes. So that can be a nice way to kind of create some contrasting edges and shapes, and a good way to clean out some of the large areas that you want without too much scraping because it tends to dissolve the paint a little bit. So I'm going to use a combination of that. So a little bit of baby oil, especially on this, the end of the paintbrush, is really helping me get down into the paint and create a sort of a nice smooth edged circle. But I don't want all of my lines to have that quality, but this is definitely speeding up the process. But again, it's giving me smooth edge lines. It's not going to give me that scratchy kind of rough hand scraped effect that I'm getting with the without the baby oil. So I would suggest you use it in combination, unless you want to go for the smooth edge line and the less scratching required. So that is a way to get through the paint a little quicker. Dip the end of your tool in a little baby oil, and it will glide across the plate a little bit better as it removes the paint. And then what we're going to do before we pull this print is we will do a little tissue pressing on here to lift up the baby oil. So now I'm back to the tool without the baby oil so I can get that sort of rough scratching sgraffito effect. I don't want to use too much of the smooth baby oil because then it starts to look like a stencil. I do want those rough edges, but for my larger chunks, like those big polka dots, it helps to not have to scratch so much. So I think the other option would be to draw or scratch the circle with the stylus for the edge, and then you could clean the middle with the baby oil. But even without the baby oil, you can see that the stylus is removing pretty quickly. Now, I am sure that I will have someone ask me about the stylus hard metal tip being damaging to the gel plate. And I promise you that it is not. It is a blunt tip, and the gel plate is extremely resilient. I actually tried to take a linoleum carving tool to the surface of the gel plate. I thought that I would add a texture to it with a linoleum carving tool. And you probably can relate to how sharp the linoleum tools are. And I am here to tell you from my own personal experience that I could not even make a cut in the surface of the gel plate with the linoleum carving tool. It did not budge the surface. So for whatever that's worth, I know that you're probably not wanting to try that yourself, but I did try it and it didn't work. So I'm not at all worried about this blunt surface stylus. So if we flip this upside down, we can see the pattern that we're getting to form through the paint. And I haven't yet done any scratching into the Posca pen, but that is another area where we can add texture, is to scratch through the colorful patterns that we've made with the Posca markers. Okay, so I think this is pretty much what I had in mind. I have scratched through the Posca pens to a certain degree. I have scratched out a pattern on the plate. And I'm just going to take my wet wipe here and kind of brush off some of the crumbs. And I could go back and put Posca in the open spaces that I've scratched out, but I want to allow that to be available for the color that I pull the print to show through as well. So I think for the baby oil, I will just get a paper towel. You could also use tissue paper, but I didn't use that much of the baby oil, but I'm just going to use a paper towel to make sure that there's no residual that's going to resist the paint that I pull the print with. So now the key is to figure out what color to pull this beautiful, glorious Sgraffito Posca plate print with. So of course I'm going to use my 9x12 Yasutomo sketch rice paper because I feel like this gives the best print because it has a very smooth side to the paper. And the gel plate loves a smooth paper because it makes a great connection and pulls off the most possible paint. So we need to go with a very light color here and something that is complementary to everything else. I have a light magenta, but I think that's going to absorb my pinks. So I think I'm going to go with the most possible neutral thing, and that's going to be a Titan Buff. But if I use a small brayer, I can kind of model the color on here instead of it having to be a complete solid color. So I'm trying to figure out what other neutral I could put on there that won't absorb any of my other colors. And I could do white. Decisions. Yellow. I feel like we'll absorb some of that. So I think the Titan Buff, and I could put a little bit of this light magenta on there and kind of stir it around. So let's put a little of the magenta and a little bit of the white and a little bit of the Titan Buff. I want to stay lighter than and neutral compared to all the colors. I'm going to take my 2-inch Speedball Deluxe brayer and just sort of make myself kind of a mottled neutral background. This will give some interest. You could also pull this onto an existing gel print if you wanted to use matte medium, which would be clear, and then you could print it over a gel print. But I think that there's so much beautiful stuff going on in the Sgraffito that you probably want to keep the background kind of pretty, kind of low key. So put a little bit more white in that just to lighten up the other colors. And I'll put a little bit more pink in here because I've lost my modeling. But remember, if this doesn't go through to the underneath layer, what is going to pull up is what's on the below this. So we'll hope for the best here. I probably didn't do that. I over brayered it. I should have left it more mottled, but we're good. Okay. All right. So that should be interesting. Now I'm going to take the smooth side of the paper and put that into the paint. And as if patience didn't play enough part in this with the scratching and the Sgraffito, now we have to press the paper into the, and I'm using my 4-inch Baron. I like this because I can get pressure out to the corners and on the outer edge of the page. I just run the Baron right off the corner like this and right off the edge. And I get a lot of pressure on the edges and the corners where typically when we rub with our hands, we kind of stay in the middle and then we get a buildup of paint out here. So I want to make sure I get good even pressure. And I like this because I'm able to press down from my shoulders when I'm standing up. So the idea behind this is we need to let it sit now for a bit. So we got to be patient. I'm going to shut off the camera, clean up my supplies while this dries into the paper. Okay, so I've cleaned up all my materials and I would say it's been about 8 to 10 minutes that I've let this paper sit on here. So by now it should be dry with everything adhered to the paper. We can start by pulling up a corner to give a peek. And I see that it is pulling. So another way that you can pull it is to flip it upside down, especially if you use cardstock at all. I'm just using rice paper, but if you use cardstock, sometimes it's easier to bend the plate than the paper. So sometimes it's easier to peel the plate back from the paper, especially if you have a rigid paper. And use the flexibility of the plate. So my pull color really looks a lot pink, even though I mixed white in with it. So I lost my pink marker colors, but that's okay. I wouldn't have wanted to pull it with just plain white. So that's okay, because I still have a lot of other Posca color in here, and I have beautiful Sgraffito scraping through the purple, and I think that it's fabulous, and it's organic, and it's fun, and it's an indirect printing method, and I am super duper happy with how this came out. Sgraffito and Posca pen on the gel plate.
Well, thanks for joining me. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you will remember that it's about the process really more than the end product. I find the doodling with the Poscas and the Sgraffito scraping with the stylus to be very meditative. And I really enjoyed just sitting here and making the gel plate ready to print. Actually, when I printed, I was kind of sad that it was done, like a good book. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. You'll find it inspiring, and I will see you back here again next week.